Hi everybody, welcome back to the Political Science Optional Foundation, and we're continuing our discussion with paper 1B. Today we start with a very important unit, okay, a unit wherein you will see a lot of questions coming in, and we're going to discuss about caste, religion and ethnicity in Indian politics. Now, of course, in this whole section you can get questions from this side, but in addition to that, we've seen federalism, we've seen the reorganization of states, some of the previous topics. You would also see questions which will have some hint or some ideas from this particular topic as well. Okay, so the very first thing is, let's understand the broad dimensions of this topic. Okay, what we have to prepare, and in this topic again, you need to know your examples well, you need to know the scholars well. Okay, and again, then if we are able to present our points in a logical manner, that is what is going to be very important. Okay, so the very first thing that you see here, when I'm saying caste, religion, ethnicity in Indian politics, okay, so my mind goes to very first thing, that if I do a comparison the very first comparison is, let's say, what is politics. Okay, and here what are we seeing, that the politics in developed and developing nations is different. Okay, now in developed nations we normally say they have more mature politics. What is the meaning of the word mature here? Is that when somebody has to vote, when the people have to vote, they generally would vote on the merits of the party, how the party is organized. Okay, and of course, when I say the party is organized, people can be divided whether they want to vote for the left or they want to vote for the right. But this decision, specifically in developing countries, is not that easy, right? And to understand that, we need to know that in the sense, of course, when I say the developed is mature, they're able to make the voting, okay, or the organization of the parties, okay, along on the party lines, on the ideological front, which is not very easy in the case of developing. So what happens in developing is, we see various social cleavages. Okay, and of course, if you recall, we have already seen, for example, F.W. Riggs mentioning India as, or the developing countries or the post-colonial societies as, prismatic societies. Prismatic societies, right? Now, when I say there are social cleavages, of course, the syllabus tells us there is a division along the caste lines, of course, on the lines of religion, and even on the lines of ethnicity. And as we see the evolution, okay, right from, let's say, India's independence to even right now, this is fundamentally affecting the Indian politics, right? And of course, we have to go to each of them one by one, but because I'm just starting with the subject, that is why I'm taking all of this at once, right? Just to give you an overview about the subject, but we will have to do them separately as well, because you can get a question that how they impact the Indian politics one by one, right? So when I'm looking at the developing countries, or let's say the post-colonial societies more particularly, we are seeing the social cleavages also impact the politics. And when the moment I say the word politics, which means not only the people who are voting, but also how the parties are constituted, okay, how the agenda is set, what will be the points that the opposition, or let's say the ruling party, will take into consideration. So there are various factors, and in these factors we see still the influence of caste, religion and ethnicity. And of course, the moment you see this, you will see again, in some sense, a contrast, or in some sense you can see a dichotomy, okay, and which is very well exemplified by certain phrases. For example, that we see elements of modernity as well as elements of tradition in Indian politics. What is the meaning of modernity here? So I can simply say that the simple fact that we would have free and fair elections, rule of law, think of secularism, various other attributes which show to us that there is an embrace of modernity, but at the same time, the traditional values, the traditional systems which were existing before, that caste used to be a very significant factor before, and even in the present day modern politics, it continues to impact, right? In fact, it is very famously also said, you would have also read about it, that Indians don't cast their vote. Okay, and this is a very simple wordplay. They don't cast their vote, but they vote their caste. Right? So, what is the meaning here? The meaning here is that both, if I start with caste, so yes, we see not just this, we also see the aspect of the Mandal commission, the Mandal politics, how caste started to become a very important factor. And it was not limited only to that aspect, even religion started to become an important factor, right? And even ethnicity. And now when I say ethnicity, you will see this more in the context of the northeast part, okay? And of course, even language, if you see language part, we've already done in the case of federalism and again the interstate disputes, okay? Basically the state reorganization, how language became a very important part of state reorganization. I hope we're able to recall that. So when I'm starting this topic, at least I need to know that there will be a coexistence of modernity as well as tradition when we are talking in this manner, right? So both things will coexist. Now, one by one, just few major aspects that we need to know. For example, if I'm talking of caste in Indian politics, the point is the relation of caste has been, of course, analyzed by various people and various scholars, right? So here, few basic points one needs to know, right? So for example, if I'm saying caste in Indian politics, I need to analyze it in certain phases. Okay, then I can even go into what is the basic meaning of this. Okay, so here if I say what are the basic phases in this particular part, so one I can say that caste in the initial times was system of social hierarchy. Okay, just a small point we need to change, HIE, social hierarchy, right? This was one of the existing systems, so I can write this as this was pre-colonial system. The caste was a system of social hierarchy, right? And of course, we can also debate, there are certain debates around this, right? The subjugation, subordination, etc. that happened, but we are more restricted to that how caste was almost used to segregate, okay? That it became ascriptive, right? Endogamous, all of those aspects we will have a look at. So that was one phase that we need to know, okay? But just after independence, caste also was related to elections. And of course, I can make a mention here of the 1950s. And when I'm saying elections, you have to think about the arithmetic of elections. I can say the term electoral arithmetic, okay? That now the different parties will try to see which particular part is going to vote for them and then whole electoral calculation. But this part is going to be very subdued in the initial aspect, right? As time will go on, you will see more and more assertion of this, right? This assertion has been studied by different scholars. I'll tell you their works also and how they have seen this. So later on, the political assertion started. Okay, this is more seen after the Mandal Commission report. Okay, so almost post, I can say 1989. Okay, with the rise even of the bullock capitalists, etc., we see various all these aspects. Okay, this is there. Now, when I see the term, be it any of these terms, be it caste, religion, or maybe ethnicity, one should not have a preconception whether it is totally right or totally wrong. Okay, here also the answer you will find something in between. Okay, so if I just want to ask a very basic question, okay, or let's say if I have to evaluate this, okay, let's say if I'm asking a question, first question, let's say, is it good for democracy? And of course the opposite question will be, is it bad? If I'm asking these questions, you will see through the works of scholars, okay, and we will see many of these scholars in some time, that the answer is mixed. Okay, is it good for democracy? We have seen, let's say, be it Rajni Kothari, okay, M.N. Srinivas, very prominent people. Their core argument is that if more people are participating in the elections, that means deepening of democracy. So, if there are more people who are actually participating, right, regardless of whatever caste there is, just because there has been an electoral assertion of people, and of course, there are different people are participating in the elections, we can also say that it is helping in deepening of democracy. That is one thing we can say, that it is helping in deepening of democracy. But when I say how or what, is it bad? The bad part is when it leads to purely identity politics. And here also, when I say identity politics, right, mobilization only on the identity, let's say, of caste, and which can again be politicized, it can be misused, people can be manipulated. That aspect, of course, becomes bad, and we will see this as we move along, that how to evaluate the assertion on these statements, okay, and how to understand this, right? So that is, for example, one thing that you have to get and maybe understand how this is. Third thing, for example, when I say caste in Indian politics, is you see this, especially in the politics, you will see this happening. And there are two very prominent statements, two very prominent phrases. Okay, one happens to be politicization of caste, the other happens to be castization of politics. Okay, castization of politics. Two terms we are seeing. Okay, we'll go into these terms in more detail, but just from the look of it, these two terms are often mentioned when we discuss caste and Indian politics. So when I'm saying politicization of caste, right? So think of basic terms like, if there's, let's say, caste census going on, whatever is related to the numbers of the people. Now, different political parties, whatever narrative that suits them, they can also politicize the whole issue. Now, if you see, if the issue is getting politicized, it does not automatically become bad. One thing is, it helps in improving the awareness, more people are getting informed and more mobilization can happen. But of course, we also understand that this can also be misused. This can also lead to more divisions in the society. It can also create a feeling of, not a feeling of harmony, but again a feeling of divisiveness. If it leads to that, then it becomes a problem. Okay, so that again is a point that we have to understand what is the meaning of this, right? Whereas we see a term castization of politics, that whatever is happening in the politics, okay, we are only seeing this from the lens of caste. Okay, let's say a particular person is getting a seat, that is simply the castization of politics, right? So both these two aspects are happening. So there is politicization of caste as well as castization of politics. Here also you will see how the tickets and points are distributed between different parties. There is a lot of electoral calculation that goes in. And specifically in developing countries, the elections are going to be very fierce, okay, very competitive. And when I say very competitive, almost it becomes that win at any cost. And that win at any cost also leads to, let's say this is the constituency, who should the people be voting for, etc. So the party have their own agenda lines and all of these things almost cut out. So if you just try to see, there are various phases of caste in Indian politics, okay, starting with simply as a system of social hierarchy, going on related to how important part it plays in elections, and then a very specific aspect, we see the rise of political assertion. When we do this, we'll also be writing proper examples, okay. We'll, let's say, the Bahujan Samaj Party, Samajwadi Party, etc., okay, different parties around India, and how caste has become a tool of political assertion, okay. Now, and we'll also evaluate it. Is it good for the democracy? Is it bad, etc.? And we will see its direct impact on politics. So these tools, etc., will help you analyze the topic better. That is the whole idea behind this whole discussion. Okay. Now, in addition to this, so we have seen some basic aspect here. Okay. So here, when I say, when we are seeing, let's say, when caste enters politics, okay, and this particular aspect has very well been analyzed by Rajni Kothari. And here also a couple of things I want to tell you, and then we'll also be writing it later on. Okay. Now, he basically rejected the extreme views. What are the extreme views? Now, see, when we say that Rajni Kothari had rejected the extreme views, so the extreme view was that caste will disappear in coming times. And then the reasoning was that caste will disappear. Why? Because when you have enough modernity, okay, slowly and steadily, caste, because earlier the view was caste was seen as a system of social hierarchy, it was an old system, and the moment modernity will take into account, this will disappear, right? The reason given was modernity. Rajni Kothari said this will not happen. Okay, and by the way, his view, that the view that we saw, that in India there is a coexistence of modernity with the tradition. Both things are there, right? Very popular statements that people don't cast their vote, they vote their caste, etc. Again, very much attributed to Rajni Kothari. So one thing is that the notion or the idea or the view that the caste will disappear because of coming of modernity has not happened. That was the one thing that he said. Okay. Second, he also rejected a view which we also now understand, that caste destroys democracy. And this point I'm again telling you, because see, normally the moment you see that identity politics is happening, politicization is happening, generally people will try to think only in one dimension. So this is only going to be bad. The point is, please remember, this can also lead to deepening of democracy. And it is not just Rajni Kothari. We will also be looking into works of Yogendra Yadav, for example. Right? And Yogendra Yadav is also known for phrases like democratic upsurge. Okay? Why will there be an upsurge in let's say democratic process when more and more people start to participate in that process? So he will simply again highlight that even though, let's say, people are becoming aware about the caste lines, but the fact that if they're participating, right, it is directly not a bad thing. It can be a good thing provided that it helps in deepening of democracy. However, yes, this statement is also not absolute. If this is getting misused, people are getting manipulated, there is a lot of divisiveness, if something is almost spoiling, or if the canvassing of vote is only happening on these lines, which goes against the Representation of People Act, Election Commission will take its course. Okay, there are different processes which will, let's say, adhere to rule of law, anything which endangers country's law and order, okay, the overall fabric of the country will be done away with. Okay, so I hope these two things you will understand, that the notion that caste will disappear the moment there is modernity is also not correct, and a simplistic understanding that caste destroys democracy is also incorrect. Okay, this is what he had told. And what did actually Rajni Kothari tell? Because again, when you are writing this topic of caste and politics, you have to understand the major points that he tries to talk about. Okay, so basically I'm writing Rajni Kothari's, and just I'm summarizing his own argument, and he basically talked about 3 outcomes. Okay, First is there can be secularization of caste. Okay, and I'll just explain to you all these terms in a moment. Okay. Second thing is, so one is caste, you have a term secularization of caste, right? Second term, he would say there will be integration. And third thing he will say, or the third outcome that will happen here, is there will be political participation. And much of what happens in the current times, you will also see, can also be explained through these three terms. Okay. Now, here what are we saying? When I say secularization, okay, normally you hear the term secular in the context of religion, right? But when I say secularization of caste, earlier caste was a ritualistic process, okay, related to rituals, rightly by birth. People had very dominant or very tied, attached identities when it comes to caste. But when I'm saying secularization of caste, that now it is going to be present everywhere, okay. So from ritualistic or from a ritual, it simply becomes political, okay. And through secularization of caste, what you would see, you will see more and more integration of people into the fold. This is how explained. Integration simply means based certain caste groups, etc. people ultimately they will participate in elections. If they participate in elections, this is going to deepen the democracy, okay. And the third thing is political participation, okay. See, if you're looking at the social part of it, for example, if I go back, caste was a system of social hierarchy, okay. So dominant caste had power. The people who are at the lower rung of the caste in this social hierarchy did not have power. Yes. Now, when I say political participation, almost a similar thing is there, right? That if people from different castes are participating in elections, okay, there is political mobilization. We are also seeing that the caste and power equations again will be seen here. And this is also modified and transformed with time, as we are seeing caste as a tool of political assertion, okay. You see rise of, let's say, certain regional political parties. Of course, some of them can be national political parties as well, right? So we're seeing all of that happening. And when this happens, so when, see, what caste in that sense, let's say, can be a tool to mobilize, okay. People have started to vote, they have, let's say, their own parties, and when they come to power, ultimately main thing is they will now have power. So what you will see, social and political, the gap is going to get blurred, okay. So here integration is an aspect when more people are participating, and ultimately it can also lead to political participation. I can link this to even power and power dynamics. Even that part becomes important, right? So when we are looking at secularization of caste, integration, political participation, this then becomes an important aspect. All right. So if we are looking at caste and caste entering politics, what do you understand is that we have rejected the extreme views, okay, especially when we are looking at the work of Rajni Kothari. And what are we seeing? Some basic outcomes. Of course, our discussion will has to go even beyond that, okay, because the moment I say caste, you can also counter question. So what about the dominant caste, right? You cannot think of all the caste as simply a uniform monolithic entity. Some will have more power, some will have less power. Absolutely true, okay. So here in this part we have seen even more specific points, okay. So for example, if I just bring the argument, you have MN Srinivas, okay, and over a period of time, the moment your unit gets done, you will have these scholars almost by hearted, okay. Some of the scholars, even in our previous discussion of paper 1V, we've already done, so do not worry much, okay. Focus not just rightly on the name, but focus on their argument, okay. So MN Srinivas will talk about the dominant caste, okay. Now if I break the term down, dominant caste, what is a dominant caste? Simply think of this will be having more numbers. So can I say this will be numerically strong? Yes. Second thing, when I look at the dominant caste, can I also say they can also be land owning? Okay, so you can have them numerically strong, they can be land owning, and with time they can also be politically organized. All these three aspects will happen here, right? So what are we looking at? Numerically strong, land owning, as well as they will be organized. Okay, now if I were to give some example here, okay, let's say Jats, let's say Patidars, Reddys, okay, all these are dominant castes. So if you look at this explanation, we need to go even beyond this, okay, that we need to understand that yes, there is a rise of dominant caste. In fact, if you recall, we've also done or have heard terms like elite capture, right? That in a society, it is ultimately the elites who are getting all the benefits, and even in the respective castes, it is the elites who will be taking up the benefit. Think of elite capture, okay? That is something that we have had a look at. So one thing is that this is also a reality that we are seeing, the rise of dominant caste, okay? Second thing, if I look at the OBCs and if I look at the rise of OBCs, for example, the rise of OBCs can also be understood, okay, through the works even of, let's say, M.S. Srinivas, but let's say if I give more scholars, we can talk about Yogendra Yadav. Again, we can talk about, one second. So yes, there is Yogendra Yadav. We can talk about again the work of Christopher Jefferlot. In fact, talks about the silent revolution that is going on. With Yogendra Yadav, I can again talk about the keyword that I told you, democratic upsurge, assertion of identity. Okay. In fact, if you recall, we can also talk about Rudolph and Rudolph, who will talk about the rise of bullock capitalists. Now, this thing can also intersect with the above one, because ultimately the OBCs, certain sections of OBCs would also become dominant caste. They can be numerically strong, they can be land owning, and of course they can be politically organized as well, right? So here what are we seeing? Rise of let's say bullock capitalist. Now this can also be an example that we can talk about, okay? So see, slowly and steadily we need to understand and how we're looking at things, okay, how the assertion is happening. So if M.N. Srinivas talking about the dominant caste concept, okay, we are talking about democratic upsurge. When we will be writing, I'll also tell you this has happened in certain phases, okay? There is a phase 1, there's also a phase 2, but right now just focus on overall outline of how we are able to conceptualize and understand the topic overall, okay? So just a very quick recap, what have we seen here? We were just having a look at caste, religion and ethnicity in Indian politics, and just a stem or a question I wanted to think about, that how do you think the politics of developed and developing countries operate, okay? Where we see a difference in mature democracies, as with in contrast you see a more prismatic fragmented society built on more social cleavages, okay, which can be seen in terms of caste, religion, ethnicity. Now that said, we also see an existence of modernity and tradition, and which will get clear as we discuss it further. Second thing is, we saw the phases of caste in Indian politics. Of course, the dominant phase was as a part of social hierarchy, but of course it can be linked to elections. But more than that, there is a political assertion, a political organization that is going on. That is something that we again have a look at. Then when we have to evaluate, and of course this is a very simplistic evaluation as of now, we'll be adding more layers to it as we move along. So is it good for democracy? We can say yes. Is it bad for democracy? Even yes to that. But the answer will always lie somewhere in between. You will have some pros and some cons and some challenges in the understanding of how caste mixes. And in fact, when you look at the caste issue, you can also link, there can be again a secondary issue of religion and even an issue of ethnicity, which can even complicate the matters further. So you cannot directly compare that how the elections or how the political parties and democracies are there in developed versus developing, because here the whole composition of people, okay, and the different political systems are different. That is the main takeaway. Other than that, we've just had a look at two terms, politicization of caste and castization of politics. That is also one. In addition to that, then a basic understanding of what Rajni Kothari had to say about, first of all, rejecting the certain extreme views, and then basically talking about the three major outcomes, okay, that this will lead to secularization of caste, it will lead to integration and political participation, and then this is something that we are also seeing, that there is a rise of dominant caste, and of course there is a rise of OBCs that we also have a look at, okay. Now, this particular part or the rise, I can even give you even more examples on that front, okay. Let's say if I write a very simple heading, the rise main thing is here, I'll first tell you some examples, okay. So for example, if I'm talking about OBCs and the rise of OBCs, so the point is, what signifies the rise of the OBCs, okay. So here there are a few things, and one of course happens to be the implementation of Mandal Commission, okay. And this was a big landmark step, okay, which again talked about that almost there was 54% population and there was 27% reservation that was to be given overall. We see one is the Mandal Commission implementation in this manner, right? That is the very first aspect. The second thing, which again is attributed to this particular part, is coalition era. And with coalition era, you have to understand, now there is no single dominant party. In fact, you will see a lot of coalition era politics in India going on, okay. So in coalition era, what is the major takeaway for us to understand is different parties with different electoral dynamics, electoral calculations will come into the fray, okay, and they will dictate the stability of the political system, right? So you see a lot of coalition era, of course there will be the rise of certain regional political parties here, okay. So I can say rise of the regional political parties. Now they can be helping in 10 seats, 20 seats, that does not matter. But the point is, this is going to happen and we have seen this, right? Now, when we analyze this part, okay, that there is of course a rise of OBCs. So here, why is it very important? Let's say, so one very important point is, if you look at numerical aspect, what did Mandal Commission overall tell you? 54% roughly, right? So rise of OBC is central because it is related to numerical majority, right? I can also say demographic majority. This was very important for them to actually have a say or a part in the elections in general, right? Second thing is, if the regional side there is an assertion, that also is a good sign because this will be federal strengthening. Again, important thing for us to know. This is federal strengthening and not weakening. In fact, this part we've already discussed, okay? The assertion of the rise of regional political parties is good for India because we don't want to homogenize everything. We want other sections to get represented. So in this sense, just in a very small nuance, okay, because if you understand this whole outline, then the whole write-up that we are doing, you'll also be able to link it and all the keywords and scholars, etc., which I want to add, we will be doing that. So that will make your job very easy. Because see, this is a very short unit, okay, caste, religion, ethnicity, but it's a very high yielding unit. People who have prepared it well will fetch very good marks, fine. So one thing is, we are seeing that there is going to be a numerical majority, yes, a demographic majority, yes. There is a federal strengthening that is going on, all right. Now, in addition to this, we also say the same for the rise of Dalits, we can say, right. Now, the question then becomes, what also signifies the rise of Dalits here, right? So here, we have seen certain political parties also coming to the fray. So here, there is the BSP model. Sometimes some scholars also make a mention of the Ambedkarite model, okay, and here also you see this. Of course, when I say BHP, I can make a broad point is rise in political mobilization, also seen in this case, okay. In fact, not only do I see Dalit politics, we also see the Dalit capitalists, certain Dalit movements happening for their assertion. All right. So, what is the point in this? See, and you will also notice, see, a system of social hierarchy can also be political power and it can also be economic power. That is why I've written the term the Dalit capitalists. Okay. And here you see there is going to be a difference that earlier the point was generally victimhood. So, from victimhood, it will go to dignity based politics. The fight for dignity, the fight for social justice, as opposed to only projecting as victims. So, when you see both the parts, see the rise of OBCs and the Dalits, again a very important aspect of caste and how caste plays an important role, because we see this in terms of federal aspect, yes, federal strengthening. Can we say this also in terms of political parties aspect? Yes. So, all these aspects are going to be related here in this particular part, right? The Mandal Commission implementation, BSP model, rise in political mobilization, okay. And the points that you see here, for example, coalition era, etc., are equally going to be valid here also. The parties, for example, who are there for the Dalit emancipation, Dalit empowerment, can also be parties in power and can also help and provide support to the other parties in general. So, this can also be linked. So, you see some points of similarity, whereas some points of difference also. And the core focus of the Dalit emancipation will be on two major factors, that not only they want development, but they also want dignity with development. So, I am just writing here dignity plus development. So, if you have listened to me carefully till now, you will get the impression that whatever we are saying, whatever points we are discussing, okay, I have told you generally the positive side of it, okay. Of course, this can also be positive side, the assertion, the rise of the OBCs, Dalits, or let's say the dominant caste, M.S. Srinivas, Rajni Kothari's analysis. But at the same time, we also need to know the critical part of it, okay. So, there will always be one side which is going to be critical here. So, I am just writing the heading critical perspective, but of course, you can understand here we will say that there are also certain challenges here, right. That if I go into more and more details here, there will be of course certain challenges that we can talk about, okay. So, what are these challenges if I go into the aspect one by one, okay. So, for example, one thing will be very obvious, that if we are going for identity politics, and let's say sustained identity politics can weaken national unity. Again, this is a very core argument made by C.P. Bhamri. Don't worry, we'll write these names later on. The point is, the identity politics can weaken the national unity, integration. This is true. Second, I can link also to developed nations. In developed nations, the people are voting on ideological basis, let's say left, right, center, whatever they want to vote at. Here also, the rise of, let's say, traditional notions will also weaken the ideological basis, okay. So, now the people are not voting on what is the ideal line of the party, but more so what is the caste of a particular leader or what the leader has to say about a certain section. So, this point I can also say that this is going to weaken ideological politics, okay. Now, other than that, what can I also say, right, that despite this, despite all of this section, okay, that even though we are saying that let's say emancipation is going on, but there are some episodic instances of violence based on caste, right. Now, this can be attributed to maybe certain political mobilization or maybe even not, but there are still some evidences of atrocities which can still continue, right. Now, in this, we can also bring in the Marxist angle. The Marxist analysis will say that if the people are organized on caste lines, this will fragment their class consciousness. In fact, if you recall, when we are doing the theory, the Marxist theory of Indian national movement, then also I made the similar points, right? Because for the Marxists, the most important thing is having or retaining the class character or the class consciousness, class. However, Marxist theory cannot be blindly applied in the Indian context. In the Indian context, more than the class, it is also the caste. And in fact, we can also say the caste determines the class, right? Because caste, the notions of the caste are very widely embedded in the in the social system, right? So even that part is there. Okay, so I can also say the caste politics masks, which means hides, same class consciousness, right? This is a point I can also make, or I can say it can mask class exploitation. Even this aspect is true, that what it is going to hide in this manner. Okay, so here if you are again looking at it from this particular aspect, this is again a point that we are able to understand. Okay, so the basic understanding till now, I think if you are able to make out that caste was seen as a system of hierarchy. Okay, and this system of hierarchy had a lot of issues, right? And with time, what happened, that now when the election started, when people got the right to vote, right, people started to vote as well. So caste almost try to modify itself, but in the modification still it retained its basic characters. Okay, so that is also there. Okay, so I hope we have been able to even understand and make some sense of this whole part, what we wanted to perhaps highlight. Okay, so that is the very first part I want to bring to your notice, just a very broad overview of what caste and the role happens in Indian politics. Okay, some terms that I've just told you are also mentioned in our previous discussions. Rudolph and Rudolph, we have been discussing about it again and again, right? And some other aspects we are seeing again and again. Okay, so that will help refresh your memory related to these topics, right? Now you put a heading, okay, caste. The overall heading, of course, happens to be caste, religion, and ethnicity. I've just given you a very short overview of right now on caste in Indian politics. So just write now the heading, write the specific heading, caste in Indian politics. The heading for us is caste okay, caste in Indian politics. Okay. Now, write the heading, caste in Indian politics. Okay. Now we will write few points here, one by one. Right, Indian politics cannot be understood. Indian politics cannot be understood without reference to caste. Indian politics cannot be understood without reference to caste, religion, and ethnicity, which constitute the principal axis, which constitute the principal axis which constitute the principal axis of social stratification social stratification and political mobilization. Which constitute the principal axis of social stratification and political mobilization. Okay, full stop, right? Contrary to early modernist expectations, contrary to the early modernist expectations, that democratic competition and industrialization contrary to the early modernist expectations, that democratic competition and industrialization would erode traditional identities, would erode traditional identities, these identities have not disappeared. These identities have not disappeared. These identities have not disappeared. Rather, they have been reconstituted. Rather, they have been reconstituted within democratic politics. Rather, they have been reconstituted. They have been reconstituted within democratic politics. Okay. So stop, right? India did not transition. India did not transition into a purely class-based or ideology-driven polity. India did not transition into a purely class-based or ideology-driven polity. So stop, right? Instead, it evolved. Instead, it evolved into what may be described as a socially mediated democracy. Socially mediated democracy where electoral competition operates, through historically embedded social cleavages. We're just opening up the topic overall with through historically embedded social cleavages. Okay, now change the paragraph. Now first we will just write about a basic understanding of caste. Now here some scholars which are very prominent from the sociology or sociological perspective also, we will also write their names. Okay, so here you write, change the paragraph, now write caste, and here whatever, this one paragraph is more than enough for you to understand the basics of caste. Okay, so I'll quote here Louis Dumont, okay, some other very prominent scholars here, so we will write some of them and just note the keywords which we are going to say. Okay, so write caste traditionally was understood as a system of birth based, it was understood as a system of birth based endogamous hierarchy. Endogamous simply means, so there are two things, exogamous and endogamous. Endogamous means within only. Okay, endogamous hierarchy. It was traditionally understood as a system of birth based endogamous hierarchy full stop, right. It was described by Louis Dumont it was described by here I think I've mentioned 2M, just only write 1M. Dumont, Louis Dumont, described by Louis Dumont as an ideological order grounded in the principle of purity and pollution. Grounded in the principle of purity and pollution. Okay, full stop, right. For Dumont, caste represented a holistic hierarchy. Caste represented a holistic hierarchy rather than an economic arrangement. Now, this is a traditional view. That is why we've written the concept of principles of purity and pollution. For the aspect of PSIR, you don't need to go beyond this. Okay, students with sociology optional, or when you're doing Indian society, purity and pollution, all of that you do in detail. Here we have to be limited to the understanding of caste from the Indian politics lens. But only the keywords are more than important. So that is why we are mentioning this only as keywords for your reference. Okay. Now, right, for Dumont, caste represented a holistic hierarchy. Caste represented a holistic hierarchy rather than economic arrangement. Holistic hierarchy rather than economic arrangement. Full stop, right. However, this static, this is an old concept. This is going to get contested, right? However, this static and ritual centric interpretation, static and ritual centric interpretation was later challenged. This was later challenged by scholars such as M.N. Srinivas, who demonstrated that caste was far more dynamic. Okay, who demonstrated that caste was far more dynamic. Far more dynamic. Okay, right, full stop, right? To concepts such as Sanskritization, to concepts such as Sanskritization, to concepts such as Sanskritization and the idea of dominant caste, to the concepts like Sanskritization and the idea of dominant caste. You can put dominant caste in inverted commas, dominant castes, right? M.N. Srinivas showed that caste groups M.N. Srinivas showed that caste groups could negotiate mobility. Caste groups could negotiate mobility and accumulate political power. Caste groups could negotiate mobility and accumulate political power. Accumulate political power. First stop, right? The dominant caste, according to him, the dominant caste, according to him, was not necessary. The dominant caste, according to him, was not necessarily ritually superior. The dominant caste, according to him, was not necessarily ritually superior, but numerically strong. This part's also we've written, right? But numerically strong, comma, economically resourceful, numerically strong, economically resourceful, and politically organized. numerically strong, economically resourceful, and politically organized. Put a dash, right? A concept crucial to understanding Okay, so here I'll just last line I'll again repeat. Okay, so numerically strong, economically resourceful, and politically organized, a concept that is crucial to understanding, post independence politics. Okay, so after writing that, now you can write the real transformation of caste. So this is the next new paragraph. In the previous sections, we had just, I think, written, or we've written a bit, two paragraphs till now, right? And in this, we've basically written what first paragraph is a basic introduction of what the caste, religion, ethnicity would do, and the second paragraph is basically about caste, right? Wherein we've quoted Louis Dumont, okay, some basic understanding we have had, even M. Srinivas, but that is also an overview. Now we will go into the part that I had tried to explain to you, right? Now we'll be writing that in more detail. In fact, we'll be continuing with Rajni Kothari, the work that is caste in Indian politics, right? So the third paragraph that we would write is, okay, and now we are going into more and more explanation part of it, fine. So, right, the real transformation of caste occurred. The real transformation of caste occurred with the introduction of universal adult franchise. With the introduction of universal adult franchise. Full stop. Okay, right. The decision to grant voting rights. The decision to grant voting rights, irrespective of literacy, property, or social status, was revolutionary. It was revolutionary in a deeply hierarchical society. It was revolutionary in a deeply hierarchical society. Okay, and this is exactly the point, if you recall, when we were seeing caste, and that too when we were seeing phases. Okay, in the very first part that we had, in fact, we had seen three phases. The first phase that we had written was, this was related to that how caste becomes a system of social hierarchy, but in the second part, how it becomes important for the elections, it becomes important for the electoral arithmetic. Okay, and the moment you would see universal adult franchise, right, and there are the people are allowed to vote. Okay, of course, initially anybody who was above 21 could have voted. Later on, by the 61st Amendment Act, this 21 age was lowered down to 18. Okay, so, and this is of course going to be very revolutionary. People, if they are able to vote, this is your democratic right. Okay, so here we are seeing this and how this would change the caste, and this would in fact bring in caste equation as well, right? And ultimately this will pan out into the power politics, though this is what we're going to explore. So we've written it was revolutionary in a deeply hierarchical society. Full stop, right? Democracy, comma, by making numbers politically valuable. Democracy by making numbers politically valuable, comma, altered the logic of caste. Altered the logic of caste. Okay, so by making this valuable, it altered the logic of caste. Full stop, right? Groups that had earlier that had earlier been subordinated, groups that had earlier been subordinated within groups that were earlier that had earlier been subordinated with ritual hierarchy suddenly acquired bargaining power in electoral politics. It suddenly acquired bargaining power in electoral politics. Full stop, right? It is in this context that Rajni Kothari, in his seminal work, seminal of course means very important, we've used this term in various places, in his seminal work, Caste in Indian Politics, argued that democracy did not destroy caste. Democracy did not destroy caste. Rather, it politicized it. Democracy did not destroy caste. Rather, it politicized it. Okay. Right. Next, right. He rejected both the liberal dash modernist assumption. He rejected the liberal modernist assumption that caste would dissolve with industrialization. So this point we've already seen, right? The liberal modernist assumption that caste would dissolve with industrialization. And the pessimistic belief that caste would fatally undermine democracy. That caste would fatally undermine democracy. So basically, he rejected both the beliefs. That is something that we have seen. Okay. Full stop, right? Instead, he proposed that caste underwent, we've already seen this, caste underwent secularization. Caste underwent secularization. he instead proposed that the caste underwent secularization, put a dash and write it. We'll write what this means. So right, it shifted from being a ritual status system. It shifted from being a ritual status system to becoming a mechanism of political organization. It shifted from being a ritual status system to becoming a mechanism of political organization and interest articulation. Political organization and interest articulation. All right. Now next, again I'll just repeat the line. It shifted from being a ritual status system to becoming a mechanism of political organization and interest articulation. Okay, full stop, right? In other words, caste ceased means to stop, caste ceased to function primarily, it ceased to function primarily as sacred hierarchy. It ceased to function primarily as a sacred hierarchy and instead began operating as a secular instrument of mobilization. As a secular instrument of mobilization. Secular instrument of mobilization. Okay, now change your paragraph. If you recall, we had also seen two very important terms, politicization of caste and castization of politics. Okay, so we will see these two terms also, and then we will continue with the historical evolution. Okay, because in fact these two terms have even been asked in the UPSC interview. So prepare this section well. Sometimes they directly ask you, let's say you're a student of political science, or maybe in general, what if they ask you, let's say if elections are around the corner, or maybe state elections are around. So sometimes this becomes a very common question. How would you explain to me politicization of caste, or let's say castization of politics? Okay, so becomes important. So we should be aware about it. Okay. So here, right? So, right, to understand, next paragraph, right, to understand this transformation. So, we are seeing the caste related transformation. So, right, to understand this transformation, we need to understand what is meant by politicization of caste. We need to understand what is meant by politicization of caste. Full stop, right? Politicization does not mean the mere presence of caste. Politicization does not mean the mere presence of caste in politics. The mere presence of caste in politics. Full stop. It refers to the process by which caste identities, it refers to the process by which caste identities are reinterpreted. Caste identities are reinterpreted as political constituencies. It refers to the process by which the caste identities are reinterpreted as political constituencies. Full stop right here. The caste groups organize themselves. The caste groups organize themselves to demand representation. The caste groups organize themselves to demand representation, access to state resources, access to state resources, reservations, reservations and policy benefits. Reservations and policy benefits. So access to state resources, reservations and policy benefits. So stop right. The negotiation, or instead of the negotiation you write the relationship, right? The relationship between caste and power. The relationship between caste and power becomes negotiable. This is important. It becomes negotiable rather than fixed. It becomes negotiable rather than fixed. First stop right. Electoral competition. Electoral competition integrates these groups. Electoral competition integrates these groups into the democratic framework. Into the democratic framework, which encourages participation rather than exclusion. Which encourages participation rather than exclusion. Rather than exclusion. Okay, full stop right. Thus, politicization can be seen as a democratizing process. Politicization can be seen as a democratizing process where the formerly marginalized communities, where the formerly, which means the before, formerly marginalized communities, formerly marginalized communities such as SCs, STs and OBCs, SCs, STs and OBCs gain voice and leverage. They gain voice and leverage within institutional politics. They gain voice and leverage within institutional politics. Okay. So stop right. The rise of backward caste leaders, and in fact, as we move along, I'll give you many examples, okay, which you can always mention in your answer. So here, how to improve our answer and how to have more value addition is by adding certain examples, of course, and of course adding the scholarly views. So we'll do a mix of both as we move along. Right, the rise of backward caste leaders in states like UP, Bihar, and Tamil Nadu, UP, Bihar, and Tamil Nadu exemplifies this transformation. It exemplifies this transformation. So this whole paragraph is related to politicization of caste. Okay. Now, in the next paragraph, we move into the second aspect, that is castization of politics. Okay. So change the paragraph. Right. However, alongside, see, so politicization of caste we've understood, right? Right. So herein the different castes are able to politically mobilize themselves, democratically align themselves, right? So that is an expansion of their democratic base. You'll have more people coming in to vote, right? The people hitherto, like we've seen, were marginalized, were excluded, now are playing an important part in the democratic exercise. But when I say castization of politics, looking at politics again from a narrow prism. So there are two ways like we understand this particular part, right? So what we are writing is, right, however, alongside this democratic expansion, emerged what critics term the castization of politics. Castization of politics. Full stop, right? Castization implies a narrowing of political discourse, where electoral outcomes depend excessively on identity arithmetic and patronage distribution. Okay, two important keywords. Identity arithmetic, patronage distribution. Okay. Then write, full stop, right, instead of ideological programs or developmental visions, a party may rely parties may rely on mobilizing specific caste blocks parties may rely may rely on mobilizing specific caste blocks through symbolic gestures, through symbolic gestures from a ticket distribution or selective welfare programs, right? Full stop, right? In such contexts, in such contexts, in such contexts, political competition, political competition becomes less about public policy. Political competition becomes less about public policy and more about consolidation of vote banks. And more about consolidation of vote banks. Okay, and that again is something wherein this now becomes an instrument. That is why we say castization of politics. It narrows down the scope, right? And the parties may look this only maybe from the point of vote bank, right? Okay, full stop. In fact, I told you sometimes if a party has to give a seat to a candidate, sometimes the caste equations are seen, okay, even in coalition building strategy, right? So let's say there's a big party, right? But the party also wants to have an image that, let's say, or as an alliance, that it takes into account different caste equations. So now you will see coalition with other specific groups, right? So what is this? This is castization of politics, right? Here also we will write this as, right? You write this as, this phenomena can be seen in practices like, candidate selection based primarily on caste composition of constituencies, or coalition building strategies, that revolve around constructing caste combinations, okay. Now here we'll write an example, right? Such as the KHAM, KHAM, KHAM formula in Gujarat, in the bracket write Kshatriya, Harijan, Adivasi, Muslim, KHAM formula in Gujarat, Kshatriya, Harijan, Adivasi, Muslim, or the MY alignment, this is Muslim Yadav alignment in parts of North India, parts of North India, right? So right. Thus, politicization of caste politicization of caste integrates, whereas castization of politics fragments. Castization of politics fragments. The castization of black politics fragments. So this is your some basic one word if you want to understand. But more than that, how to explain it, etc. We have written it extensively, so this is more than enough for you to know. All right. Again, of course, change your paragraph. Now I'll try to almost consolidate the few terms that I had written. In fact, one second. So we will also be now writing about this aspect, the rise of OBCs and Dalits. Second, these terms, Yogendra Yadav, Christopher Jeffrey Lot, okay, the various terms, dominant caste, etc. Now we'll be writing that and we'll be weaving this in the historical evolution format. Okay, so now you please write. The post 1960s period marked a decisive shift the post 1960s period marked a decisive shift in the social composition of political power. In the social composition of political power. Okay. Again, just repeating the point, right? The post 1960s period marked a decisive shift in the social composition of political power, right? The decline, full stop, the decline of one party dominance. And the moment I say this, one party system, think of Rajni Kothari, right? And think of Congress is India and India is Congress. Decline of one party dominance after the 1967 elections. After the 1967 elections, weakened the monopoly. It weakened the monopoly of upper caste elites. Weakened the monopoly of upper caste elites. Okay, weakened the monopoly of upper caste elites in many regions. In many regions. Okay. In many regions. Full stop. So it weakened the monopoly of upper caste elites in many regions now, right? Full stop, right? Christopher Jeffrey Lot. Christopher Jeffrey Lot characterizes this restructuring as India's silent revolution. Put this in inverted commas, India's silent revolution. I think this term also we had written somewhere. Okay, the silent revolution, right? India's silent revolution, highlighting the gradual and profound entry of OBCs gradual and profound entries of OBCs into legislative assemblies and parliament. Into legislative assemblies and parliament. Okay. So again, just repeating the line that Christophe Jeffrelot characterizes this restructuring as India's silent revolution, highlighting the gradual but profound entry of the OBCs into the legislative assemblies and parliament. Fine. Now, right, this shift, full stop, this shift was not sudden. This shift was not sudden but cumulative. This shift was not sudden but cumulative. As agrarian transformations as agrarian transformations, education and regional political assertion empowered the intermediate peasant castes empowered intermediate peasant castes. Okay, full stop, right? The Mandal Commission, the Mandal Commission's implementation in the 1990s, Mandal Commission's implementation in the 1990s institutionalized this transition, by expanding reservations for OBCs, in public employment. Okay. Okay. So what are we seeing overall here? So again, the mention of Mandal Commission implementation 1990s institutionalized this transition by expanding reservations for OBCs in public employment. This we know. Okay. Right. The last line for this paragraph, right? The Mandal movement reconfigured political alignments from a weakened upper caste dominance in several states okay, weakened the upper caste dominance in several states and catalyzed the role of catalyzed the rise of regional parties which represented the backward caste interests Okay, now let's change the paragraph. Now we'll talk about the democratic upsurge which Yogendra Yadav keeps on talking about. I also keep on referencing this many a times in the lectures. Okay, and this is not let's say limited only to the understanding of caste in Indian politics, right? When we talk about the Indian party system, even the federal part, in all of that we can make a mention of this part, right? So this is again something that we'll have a look at. Okay. So here you can make a mention, right? Yogendra Yadav interprets these developments as phases of democratic upsurge. Okay, put a dash and write moments when new social groups moments when new social groups enter political arena, and redefine the meaning of representation. Full stop, right? The first upsurge disrupted Congress hegemony. While the second, which was associated with Mandal politics, okay, associated with Mandal politics and Dalit assertion, and we'll just also write about Dalit assertion in the next paragraph. Expanded participation further. Expanded okay, it expanded the political participation further. Okay, it expanded political participation further, right? Full stop, the last line, right? In this sense, caste became an instrument of redistributing power. Caste became an instrument of redistributing power rather than, important line, caste became an instrument of redistributing power rather than merely reproducing social hierarchy. Rather than merely reproducing social hierarchy. Okay, one more paragraph we'll see for this particular class. In the next class, of course, I'll go in how to overall consolidate and maybe cover the topic remaining part, and then of course we move into religion, ethnicity, and all of that, right? Here in this paragraph, we are talking about Dalit politics. In fact, we'd also mentioned terms in that regard. Okay, so let's write that. Okay, right? Dalit politics. Dalit politics illustrates this democratization. Dalit politics illustrates this democratization most vividly okay, full stop, right? Inspired by Ambedkarite ideology, Dalits Dalits increasingly shifted Dalits increasingly shifted from dependence on upper caste patronage dependence on upper caste patronage so it shifted from dependence on upper caste patronage to autonomous political mobilization. Now here we'll write an example, right? The formation of BSP, Bahujan Samaj Party, BSP, marked an attempt to convert demographic strength, again an important line, into demographic strength into political authority, demographic strength into political authority. Full stop, right? Slogans emphasizing dignity, comma representation, dignity, comma representation, and Bahujan solidarity, dignity, representation, and Bahujan solidarity reflected a shift okay, it reflected a shift from passive marginalization to assertive citizenship, okay, full stop, right? As Sudipta Kaviraj, as Sudipta Kaviraj observes, India has moved from a hierarchy of castes. This is an important line. India has moved from a hierarchy of castes to democracy of castes. Hierarchy of castes to democracy of castes. So stop right. This formulation captures the paradox of contemporary India. This formulation captures the paradox of contemporary India, where caste persists, but its function has transformed. Caste persists, but its function has transformed. Full stop, right? It no longer exclusively dictates ritual status. It no longer exclusively dictates okay, it no longer exclusively dictates the ritual status. Okay, comma, it actually shapes electoral bargaining. It actually shapes electoral bargaining. Okay. The last paragraph of criticism, right? right? Yet, change the paragraph, right? Yet this democratization remains, yet this democratization remains incomplete, and fraught with contradictions. Fraught with contradictions, which means there are a lot of contradictions here. Okay, full stop, right? Andre Bete. Okay, 1 second, just a small correction. Peteill, Andre Bete, cautions that while caste ideology may appear weakened, while caste ideologies may appear caste ideology may appear weakened in formal disclosure, or right, weakened in formal discourse. Caste ideology may appear weakened in formal discourse. Caste ideology may appear weakened in formal discourse, structural inequalities endure. Structural inequalities endure. So stop, right? Atrocities against Dalits, atrocities against Dalits, social segregation in housing and marriage, social segregation in housing and marriage, and disparities in education and employment. Disparities in education and employment, and basically we're trying to say that even if they've gotten political power, not everything is fine, right? So there still remains a lot of scope for improvement, right? The disparities in education and employment, the disparities in education and employment demonstrate that political representation does not automatically dissolve social discrimination. It does not dissolve automatically social discrimination. Okay. Now, in fact, in the criticism, we had also done the Marxist perspective, right? So we'll also write one more line, right? From a Marxist perspective, caste mobilization may fragment class-based solidarity. It may fragment class-based solidarity and deflect attention from broader economic inequalities. Okay, the last line, right? Critics such as C.P. Bhamri, argue that identity-centered politics can weaken ideological competition. It can weaken ideological competition, encourage populism, and short-term patronage over long-term institutional reform. Okay, so this is where we'll end for today, right? The remaining part of course, this whole topic of unit caste, religion, and ethnicity in Indian politics will be continue from this part, right? So here I'll also give you then an overall overview and some of the recent trends that we see in the caste related equations, fine? Okay, and then we'll continue from there, and then of course we go to religion and ethnicity. All right, so you can keep on revising. I'll now meet you in the next lecture. Thank you.